And the agreement between fasting plasma and OGTT is also very poor. And that's why it has been said that nearly if you take cutoff of HbA1c of 6.5, you are missing nearly one-third cases of diabetes if you don't do a fasting plasma glucose. So fasting is more sensitive a test. HbA1c is more specific a test. So if you want to confirm a diagnosis of diabetes, I would go by the HbA1c. But if you want to screen in masses or screen an asymptomatic patient, fasting would be the preferred test. And then OGTT would add to this sensitivity and specificity. So that is the way diagnosis needs to be considered. Then coming to the 2 hours plasma glucose level. Now this is after a 75 gram anhydrous glucose dissolved in water. Now this anhydrous glucose is not same as your glucose or your glucon D or your other forms of glucose. So that is one point which we need to remember, that most of the labs usually tend to do it with the available packs of glucon D. But then you need to ensure that if you are using the criteria, you use it in a very standardized fashion. So nowadays you have certain companies who have come up with 75 gram sachet of anhydrous glucose, and then that can be used for monitoring. Then coming to pre-diabetes, these are the criteria as I showed you in the table. Now, how do you diagnose pre-diabetes? Most of the patients are keen on knowing, do I have diabetes, am I normal, or am I at risk of diabetes? So the diagnosis is based on both fasting and 2 hours values. That by definition, pre-diabetes is to be labeled when both are high. If one is high, if you have impaired fasting glucose or you have IGT alone, then this is taken as risk factor. It is not taken as pre-diabetes. So they are considered to be cardiovascular risk factors. Of course, these patients have the same risk, but a patient of pre-diabetes will have more risk than a patient with IFG alone or IGT alone. So this needs to be, you should be clear with the definitions when the patient is asking you the interpretation of the value. Now, I think glucose estimation you are well aware, but there are certain methods which can give spuriously high and low values. So I think there are different technologies that I was told by Dr. Patwardhan that nowadays the old methods are outdated and we are using only the hexokinase method for the glucose estimation. But what matters here is the technique in which the samples are collected. Normally it has been said that in the level of glucose is highest in arterial circulation. Now you can't, you are not collecting arterial circulation, so it has been said that tourniquet or making the extremity cold by applying the tourniquet itself is known to give a falsely low glycemic value. So it is better that the tourniquet is released and you have some sort of warming before you collect the sample. Then secondly, both these red cells and leukocytes have the glycolytic enzymes, and therefore in patients who are likely to have these kind of problems like sepsis or infection, there is a chance that you can get a spuriously low value. So in a patient who is having a urinary tract infection, there is a possibility that the level may be spuriously low. Then rapid separation of the plasma is a mandation if you want to get the exact value, and rapid cooling is also an effective method to prevent glycolysis. And what has been seen is that you get glucose about 50% lower in whole blood because of the RBC consumption of glucose. So when you are using whole blood methods for diagnosis, then it would be, you would be getting falsely low values in that situation. Now about OGTT, it has been recommended, these are recommendation by the ADA that OGTT should not be done in patients with acute medical or surgical stress. So if you have an inpatient, he's already under stress. So doing a OGTT in an IPD patient doesn't make any sense. Secondly, those who are chronically malnourished, they tend to absorb more. So these are patients where OGTT might give you false results. And there is a need to consume at least 150 grams of carbohydrate. Normal Indian diet would have that, but if a patient is on a starvation or some regimen, in that case OGTT might give you false results. Now patients who have been confined to bed for more than 3 days, the bedridden patients may give you falsely low values in OGTT, so they should not be performed. And they should preferably discontinue all the medications if you are using OGTT for diagnostic purpose. Patients who have undergone gastrectomy or have a chance of dumping syndrome also may have erratic results. So interpreting OGTT in these patients need a bit of caution. As I said that this is the natural history of diabetes. Now earliest to rise is the postprandial glucose. So even before the onset of diagnosis, you will get IGT as the earliest manifestation, and here is the time when the fasting actually starts rising. But there may be times or there may be treatments on which the patient may have a reversal of the reports. So if a patient is say on bedtime insulin, you'll get a very low fasting glucose, and if the patient is say on a postprandial insulin and not on a nocturnal insulin, then there is a chance that you will get a reversal of the. So what the patient is taking, the tablets, the regimen may hamper the assessment of your glycemic control. So in patients, what about the random blood glucose? Now I've seen most of the patients come with the general practitioner having a blood glucose checked on the finger stick. Doctor, you start me on treatment for diabetes. But I think that should not be the practice. It needs a confirmation with a lab, because glucometer has its own pros and cons, and there are a lot of issues in terms of glycemic evaluation on glucometric alone. But random blood glucose can be done in laboratory, and here the random glucose in a patient who is symptomatic or has some osmotic manifestations above 200 is taken as criteria for diagnosis. Now again, this needs to be repeated. This needs to be confirmed on a second occasion. The same test needs to be repeated. So whatever you are doing for diagnosis needs to be repeated. And if two different tests they are above the diagnostic threshold, you diagnose the patient, or 2 out of the 3 are confirming that the patient is diabetic, you confirm that patient has a diabetic status, and such a patient needs treatment. Now there is somewhat a correlation between the HbA1c and the mean plasma glucose, and if you see that at the HbA1c of 6, around about 115 to 120 is the average mean glucose. So that can give us a rough clue. Most of the times some labs are doing only HbA1c with a mean glucose reporting, and in that case we can have some clue whether this patient is likely to have diabetes or no. But one needs to remember that this kind of a correlation does exist. With 1% rise in HbA1c, you will get about a change of 35 to 50 milligram of glucose. So that is the correlation. So I think the Clinical Chemist Society recommends that you check a venous plasma from an accredited laboratory. The effectiveness of screening with HbA1c needs to be seen, and meters and skin prick are not to be recommended for diagnosis. So glucometers should not be used for diagnostic purpose. They can very well be used for monitoring purposes. Now, role of HbA1c is one more controversial issue. The HbA1c is a memory chip which shows the interaction of Hb with glucose in past 40 to 60 days. And this is the classification of your hemoglobin. So initially, I am sure most of you know that we used to have glycosylated hemoglobin as the parameter, and now we have a much specific HbA1c parameter. So glycosylated hemoglobin is different from your HbA1c, and now what we are evaluating is HbA1c. Why is this so? Because this is the HbA1c component is the one which is attached to glucose. The remaining are attached to unknown carbohydrates and unknown glucose moieties. So we are interested in seeing the glycemic status. We are not interested in seeing what happens to the other carbohydrate attachments. So 4 to 6% is the average normal reporting for a normal HbA1c status.